when one of the biggest men on the planet stood in a parking lot in Newark, New Jersey. Holding a cardboard box in his hands, he did not move for a very long time. It was a Thursday, March 6, 2025, his 53rd birthday, 11:17 in the morning. The parking lot belonged to what used to be an apartment building on Clinton Avenue. The building itself was gone now, demolished in 2019. What remained was the concrete slab where the foundation had been, and a chain-link fence, and 3 pigeons on the fence, and the smell of March in Newark, which is cold rain, and diesel, and something underneath that, something older and harder to name. The sky was the color of wet newspaper. Traffic moved on the avenue. A school bus turned the corner. A man in a yellow coat was walking a dog that had no interest in walking. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, wore a plain black pullover and dark jeans, and a pair of size 23 sneakers that cost more than most people's rent. His hands, wide enough to palm a human head the way most people palm a tennis ball, held the cardboard box with the specific care you give something that could break. He was not looking at the demolished building, he was looking at the box. Inside the box was a pair of basketball shoes. Blue and white, never worn, still in the original tissue paper, 41 years old, smelling faintly of rubber and something like the past. And on the inside of the lid, in handwriting that belonged to a man who was now 84 years old and had 11 days to leave his home, was a single sentence written in blue ballpoint pen in 1984, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He had not seen these shoes in 4 decades. He had not known they still existed. He had not known that the man who bought them, a retired postal worker named Eugene Ray Holloway, 73 years old at the time Shaq last saw him, 84 years old now, had kept them in a closet on the top shelf, in the same box, for 41 years, had moved them from Newark to Elizabeth to the house on Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey, where he had lived for the last 22 years, had carried them through a marriage and through the death of his wife and through everything after, had never given them to anyone, had never explained them to anyone, had simply kept them on the top shelf in the same box, because some things you keep. And now Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old, had 11 days. Stay with us through this entire video. Because the man who bought those shoes did not tell Shaq he bought them. Not when he bought them, not in the years that followed, not in the 41 years that passed. And what Shaq discovers about what those 41 years of silence actually contained, is something that will reach back to a 12-year-old boy on a basketball court in Newark and change everything you thought you knew about what it means to believe in someone before they have given the world any reason to. And by the time this story is over, by the time the final piece connects, you will understand what a pair of unworn shoes in a cardboard box on a top shelf for 41 years actually costs a person. And you will not be ready for it. But first, you have to understand the shoes. To understand what happened in that parking lot on Shaq's 53rd birthday, you have to go back. You have to go back past the 4 NBA championships and the Finals MVP trophies, and the business empire, and the doctorate from Barry University. Past the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Miami Heat, and the Phoenix Suns, and the Boston Celtics, and the Orlando Magic, and LSU. Past the shoe contracts, and the commercials, and the billions of dollars, and the arenas that shook when he walked into them. Past all of it. You have to go back to Newark, New Jersey. The summer of 1984. Shaquille O'Neal is 12 years old, and already 6 feet 1 inch tall, and he outweighs most of the adults on his block, and his feet are a size 15. And his mother cannot afford the shoes he needs, and he knows this, and he does not say anything because he already understands, at 12 years old, that saying it out loud does not change it. His mother, Lucille O'Neal, 29 years old that summer, worked 2 jobs. She worked the early shift at the diner on Market Street, and she worked evenings at a cleaning service that sent her to office buildings downtown. She worked without complaint, and without asking for recognition, and with the specific fierce efficiency of a woman who had decided that her children would not feel the shape of what she was carrying. She could always stretch $1. She made meals out of nothing that tasted like something, and she kept the apartment clean, and she got Shaquille to school on time every morning. She was extraordinary in the ways that do not make the news. But the shoes were a problem. The shoes that Shaquille needed that summer, the basketball shoes that all the other boys on the court had, the ones that would let him play the game he was already beginning to understand, was his particular gift to give the world, cost $64. And $64, in August of 1984, with 2 jobs and 1 child, and rent due on the first, was not a number that added up easily. Shaquille did not ask for them directly. He was not that kind of child. He mentioned them once, carefully, as a question more than a request. Lucille heard him. She said she would see what she could do. He said okay. He did not mention it again. He played that summer in a pair of canvas sneakers that were 2 sizes too small and held together at the toe, with a rubber band he had found on the sidewalk. He played in them every day on the court behind the building on Clinton Avenue. He played in them, and he was still better than everyone else on the court because his body was arriving ahead of schedule, and there was nothing that could be done about that, canvas sneakers or otherwise. Eugene Ray Holloway had lived on the 4th floor of the building on Clinton Avenue since 1977. He was 52 years old in the summer of 1984. He was a tall man, 6 feet 2, with a careful posture that came from 30 years of carrying mail through every kind of weather the Newark sky had to offer. He was retired by then, 2 years out from the post office, and he spent his mornings at the senior center on Broad Street, and his afternoons in the community room on the 1st floor of the building, where he ran a chess program for the children in the building, and sometimes for the children from the blocks nearby who wandered in because there was nowhere else to be. He had noticed Shaquille the way you could not help but notice Shaquille. The child was impossible to miss. He was 12 years old, and he was already enormous, and he moved through the building and through the world with the specific combination of physical confidence and social shyness that very large children often have, because the body says one thing and the person inside the body is still figuring out what they are saying. Eugene watched him on the court from the window of the community room. He watched him for several weeks that summer. He watched the canvas sneakers and the rubber band at the toe, and he did not say anything about it, because Eugene Ray Holloway was the kind of man who understood that pointing at a person's difficulty does not solve it, and sometimes makes it worse. He went to the sporting goods store on Broad Street on a Thursday afternoon in late August. The shoes cost $64, and he paid for them in cash. He found a box, and he put the shoes inside, and he wrote on the inside of the lid with the blue ballpoint pen he always carried in his shirt pocket, "For Shaquille, so he can fly." He knocked on the door of the O'Neill apartment on the 3rd floor at 6 in the evening, when he knew from the building's rhythms that Lucille would be home between her 2 jobs. Lucille opened the door. He handed her the box. He said, "For the boy." She said, "Mr. Holloway, I can't," he said. "You can," he said. "Let him fly." He went back upstairs. Lucille O'Neill stood in the doorway of her apartment on the 3rd floor of the building on Clinton Avenue, with the box in her hands, and she pressed her lips together in the specific way she pressed them when something had moved through her that was too large for the moment, and she was managing it carefully. She put the box on the kitchen table. She left it there. When Shaquille came in from the court at 7:30, she said, "There's something on the table." He looked at the box. He opened it. He looked at the shoes, the blue and white, the tissue paper, the smell of rubber. He looked at what was written on the inside of the lid, "For Shaquille, so he can fly." He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Mr. Holloway?" Lucille said, "Yes." He looked at the shoes for another moment. Then he said, "I'll bring them back to him when I'm done with them." Lucille looked at him. She said, "When you're done with them?" He said, "When I've flown enough, I'll bring them back." He never brought them back. Not because he forgot. Not because he didn't care. Because life moves the way life moves when you are a child becoming something the world hasn't made room for yet. Because the shoes wore out in a year, worn down to nothing by the hours on the court. And then there were new shoes, better shoes, shoes with his name on them eventually. And the specific shoes from the summer of 1984 became the way most specific things become, not forgotten. Just not where you're looking. He moved with his family when Sergeant Philip Harrison came into their lives, and the Army moved them first to Germany, and then to Georgia, and then to San Antonio. LSU came, the NBA came. Everything that was going to happen, happened. And somewhere behind all of it, on the 4th floor of a building on Clinton Avenue in Newark, Eugene Ray Holloway kept the box on the top shelf of his closet. Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old. He lived at a 114 Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey. A 2-bedroom house he had moved into with his wife Vera in 2003. Vera had died in 2018, 7 years ago now. They had not had children. She had been a school teacher for 31 years, 1st grade, and she had loved children with the specific ferocity of a woman who gave them everything in the classroom because they needed it and because it was what she had to give. Since Vera died, Eugene Ray Holloway had lived alone at a 114 Grafton Avenue. He had neighbors he waved to. He had a doctor he saw quarterly at the clinic on Chancellor Avenue. He had a television he watched in the evenings, and a chair in the living room that had been his chair since 1986, and a kitchen where he still made the same meals, the same ones Vera used to say were his only two real skills, chili and cornbread. His income was $1,140 a month, Social Security and a small pension from the Postal Service. His rent was $900 a month, which he had paid reliably, on time, every month, for 22 years. In January of 2025, he received a letter from a company called Meridian Property Holdings, LLC. The letter informed him that 114 Grafton Avenue had been acquired as part of a portfolio purchase in December of 2024. It further informed him that Meridian intended to develop the property as part of a residential conversion project in the Irvington market. He was being given notice to vacate. The deadline was March 17, 2025, 11 days from the Thursday when this story begins. Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old, had $1,140 coming in each month. His savings account held $2,860. He had no family in New Jersey. He had an elderly neighbor named Gertrude Moss, 78, who brought him food sometimes, and who had read the letter when he showed it to her in February, and who had said, very quietly, "Eugene, we need to find someone who can help." He had said, "Gertrude, there's nobody to call." She had looked at him for a long time. She went home. She made one call. Patricia Delacroix was 44 years old, a community housing advocate with the New Jersey Tenants Legal Assistance Project, based in Newark. She had been doing this work for 16 years. She was methodical, quick-moving, and deeply familiar with the specific architecture of displacement, which is how she would have described what Meridian Property Holdings was doing to the properties on Grafton Avenue. She received calls about situations like this the way most people receive phone calls, constantly, from people who had waited too long and had too few days and too many years behind them in the same place. She received Gertrude Moss's call on a Wednesday morning in late February. She listened to the situation. She asked several questions. She made several notes. She asked the man's full name. Gertrude said, "Eugene Ray Holloway." Patricia Delacroix went very still. She had heard that name before. Not recently, several years ago. In a conversation at a community event in Newark, a conversation about the Clinton Avenue building, and a chess program, and a retired postal worker who had been something of a quiet fixture in the neighborhood for decades. She had also heard, in that conversation, something else. She asked Gertrude, "Does he still have the shoes?" A pause. Gertrude said, "What shoes?" Patricia Delacroix said, "I'll call you back." She made several phone calls over the next 48 hours. She spoke with a woman named Celestine Robards, 66 years old, who had grown up in the Clinton Avenue building, and who remembered the summer of 1984 with the clarity that specific summers have when you are a child and the world is still small enough to be memorable. Celestine remembered Mr. Holloway going to the sporting goods store. She remembered the box. She remembered who the box was for. She remembered something else too. She said, "He never told anyone he bought them. Not then, not after. I only knew because I saw him come back from the store that day. I was 9 years old and I was sitting on the stoop. He walked past me with the box and he had his hand over the lid, like he didn't want anyone to see what was written on it. But I saw. I could read." Patricia Delacroix listened to all of this. She put the phone down. She thought about a 12-year-old boy and a pair of shoes, and 41 years. She thought about an 84-year-old man on a top shelf in a closet. Then she spent 2 hours finding a contact number. Kevin Okafor had been with Shaq for 12 years. He had seen many things. He had learned to read the quality of incoming calls the way you learn to read weather, which is not from any single sign but from a combination of things. The call from Patricia Delacroix came in on a Monday morning in late February at 9:47 a.m. He answered because his job was to answer. He listened because what he heard in the first 30 seconds was the specific combination of urgency and specificity that told him this was not a routine situation. Patricia told him about Eugene Ray Holloway. She told him about 114 Grafton Avenue. She told him about Meridian Property Holdings and the March 17th deadline. She told him about the $2,860 and the $1,140 per month and the $900 rent and the math that didn't work. Then she told him about the shoes. Kevin was quiet for a moment. He said, "Can you send me everything you have?" She sent it that afternoon. Kevin read the file in his office on a Monday evening. He read it twice, then he sat at his desk for 11 minutes looking at his phone. He had worked for Shaq for 12 years. He had arranged many things. He had learned when to go through channels and when to simply go to Shaq directly. He went directly. He called at 8:43 in the evening. Shaq answered on the second ring. Kevin said, "I need you to look at something." He sent the file. He heard the silence on the other end that meant Shaq was reading. The silence lasted 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Then Shaq said, very quietly, "The shoes are still in the box." Kevin said, "According to Gertrude Moss, yes." Another silence. Shaq said, "When does he have to leave?" Kevin said, "March 17th. One more silence. Shaq said, "Get me an address." Kevin gave him 114 Grafton Avenue, Irvington, New Jersey. Shaq said, "Clear Thursday morning." Kevin said, "Thursday is your birthday." Shaq was quiet. He said, "I know what day it is." He ended the call. He sat in his office in Orlando for a long time. The office was dark except for the light of his phone. Outside, the February Florida night was doing what February nights did in Orlando, which was be mild and unremarkable and completely indifferent to anything happening inside a building. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower ran at an improbable hour. Somewhere further, a car radio passed slowly, playing something he couldn't identify. He thought about a 12-year-old boy on a basketball court in Newark. He thought about canvas sneakers held together with a rubber band. He thought about a man who went to a store on a Thursday afternoon in August of 1984 and paid $64 and wrote 4 words on the inside of a box lid and went upstairs and said "let him fly" and never mentioned it again. He thought about 41 years. He thought about what it means to believe in someone before they have given the world any reason to. He picked up his phone. He called his mother. Lucille O'Neill answered on the 3rd ring. He said, "Mama, do you remember Mr. Holloway?" A long pause. Lucille said, very quietly, "Eugene Holloway, from the 4th floor." He said, "Yes." She said, "I think about him sometimes, every now and then." "Where did that come from?" He said, "He's being evicted. He's 84 years old. He has 11 days. The line was very quiet. Then Lucille said, "Oh, Eugene." It was not a dramatic statement. It was the specific sound of a woman carrying something she had been carrying for 41 years and had just been asked to put it back on. Shaq said, "The shoes are still in the box." Silence. Lucille O'Neill said, very quietly, "He kept them." He said, "He kept them." She did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You go see him. You go right now." He said, "Thursday. His birthday is the 6th. I'm going on the 6th." She said, "Your birthday?" He said, "Yes." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "Your father bought you those shoes, Shaquille. Your father bought you those shoes before your father was your father." He pressed his hand flat over his mouth. He held it there. Outside, the lawnmower stopped. The car radio was gone. The Florida night was very still. He said, from behind his hand, "I know, Mama." She said, "You go see him." He said, "I will." They talked for 27 more minutes about nothing in particular, about the weather in Florida, about a show she was watching, about a meal she had made that week that had come out well. And then they said goodnight, and Shaq sat in his dark office with the phone in his hands for a long time. Kevin Okafor spent the following 2 days building a complete picture of Eugene Ray Holloway's situation. He was thorough. He was always thorough. He spoke with Patricia Delacroix at the Tenants Legal Assistance Project. He spoke with the Irvington Housing Department. He ran the public records on 114 Grafton Avenue and on Meridian Property Holdings, LLC, which turned out to be a holding company registered in Delaware that had acquired 12 properties in Essex County in a single transaction in December of 2024. He found a contact at Meridian's legal team. He called on Wednesday morning and identified himself without mentioning who he worked for. He asked about the Grafton Avenue property. He asked about the timeline. He asked about the specific development plans. He was methodical. He listened carefully. He asked about the assessed value of the property and the development timeline and the earliest possible closing date for a purchase. Then he called Shaq. He said, "The Grafton Avenue property is peripheral to their main development cluster. They bought it in the portfolio deal, and it doesn't fit their primary commercial plans. They'd move on it quickly for the right offer." Shaq said, "Get a number." Kevin had the number by Wednesday afternoon. Shaq said, "Do it." The offer went in on Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, March 6, 2025, Shaq's 53rd birthday, Meridian Property Holdings had accepted. The property at 114 Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey, was being acquired by the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund, a foundation subsidiary Kevin had established that morning at 7:45 a.m. before the first cup of coffee. Shaq was already on a plane to Newark. The flight from Orlando was 2 hours and 14 minutes. He did not work during the flight. He sat in his seat, which was the aisle seat because the window seat and the middle seat together could not contain him in any comfortable configuration, and he looked at the clouds below and thought about a building that was no longer standing on Clinton Avenue in Newark, New Jersey. He thought about a chess program in a community room on the first floor. He thought about a man who had been a quiet fixture in a neighborhood for decades and who had watched a 12-year-old boy on a basketball court from the window and who had gone to a store on a Thursday afternoon and paid $64 and said let him fly and never mentioned it again. He thought about March 17th. 11 days. He thought about $2,860 and $900 rent and an 84-year-old man with no family in New Jersey. He thought about 41 years of shoes on a shelf. The plane landed at Newark Liberty International Airport at 11:02 in the morning. He was in the rental car at 11:14, a plain gray sedan. He drove himself. Kevin had offered to arrange a driver. He had said no. He drove through Newark on a Thursday morning in March on his 53rd birthday. He drove past the school. He drove past the corner where the diner used to be where Lucille worked the early shift. He drove past the building that used to be on Clinton Avenue. He stopped in the parking lot where the foundation had been. He sat in the car with the engine running for 7 minutes. He looked at the chain-link fence and the 3 pigeons and the concrete slab and the March sky, the color of wet newspaper. He thought, I was a 12-year-old boy in canvas sneakers with a rubber band at the toe, and a man I barely knew went to a store and paid $64 and believed in something that had not happened yet. He got out of the car. The cardboard box was not in the parking lot. The cardboard box was at 114 Grafton Avenue. But Shaq had driven here first because he needed to stand here first. He needed to stand in the parking lot of the building that was no longer there and look at the concrete slab and let the morning move through him before he could do what came next. He stood there for 9 minutes, then he got back in the car. He drove to Irvington. 114 Grafton Avenue was a narrow 2-story house on a street of narrow 2-story houses in a neighborhood that had been working class in 1975 and was still working class in 2025, just differently. The houses were close together. Some of them were very well kept. Some of them were not. Number 1114 was the kept kind. The front steps were clear. The railing was sound. The storm door had a screen that was intact. There was a small window box with dried brown stalks in it that would be flowers in April. Vera had planted them, probably. The kind of thing that continues after the person who planted it is gone. Shaq parked across the street. He sat in the car for 3 minutes. Then he got out. At the moment Shaq crossed the street toward the house at 114 Grafton Avenue, Gertrude Moss, 78 years old, was watching from the window of her house at number 116. She had known someone was coming, Kevin had told her. She had not told Eugene because Eugene would have said there was no need for anyone to come, and she had already decided that Eugene did not get to make that decision this time. She pressed one hand against the glass as Shaq crossed the street. She watched him go up the front steps of 114. She watched him knock. The knock was the specific kind of knock that a man who is very large makes when he is trying not to be frightening, which is lighter than you would expect. A careful knock, 3 times, then waiting. Inside the house, Eugene Ray Holloway was in his kitchen making coffee. He made coffee every morning at the same time, 11:15, regardless of what the morning had brought or failed to bring. He was wearing a gray cardigan that was 20 years old and dark slacks that had been pressed. He was a man who pressed his slacks. He heard the knock and he thought it was probably Gertrude with food, which she brought sometimes, and he called out that the door was open and she could come in. The door opened, and then he heard the footsteps. Not Gertrude's footsteps. Different footsteps, heavier. The specific sound of someone very large moving carefully across an old hardwood floor because they know that their weight changes the way rooms respond to them, and they are trying to be considerate about it. Eugene Ray Holloway turned from the coffee maker. 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds, filling the kitchen doorway completely, one shoulder angled slightly because the doorway and the shoulders were not in full agreement, wearing a plain black pullover, a watch. His face, which was the face of a 53-year-old man who had become one of the most famous people on the planet, and still sometimes looked, in certain moments, like a 12-year-old boy. Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old, stood in his kitchen with a coffee mug in one hand and looked at Shaquille O'Neal and did not speak for 7 seconds. Then he said, "You look like your mother." And Shaq pressed both enormous hands over his face and stood in the kitchen doorway without speaking for several seconds. Then he moved his hands. He said, "Mr. Holloway." Eugene said, "Eugene, just Eugene." He said it the way old men say things when they are pretending they are not overwhelmed by something. "Come in, I just made coffee." They sat at Eugene's kitchen table, a small table, round, with 2 chairs. The kitchen smelled like coffee, and the specific smell of an old house well kept for many years. The window above the sink looked out on a backyard where there was a bird feeder on a post that was well stocked and apparently visited, because there were sparrows at it as they sat down. Eugene set a mug in front of Shaq. He sat across from him. He was thin in the way men get thin at 84 when the body has decided it no longer needs surplus. His hands, wrapped around his own mug, were the hands of someone who had carried mail in every kind of weather for 30 years and had the specific quality of outdoor kept hands. He looked at Shaq the way you look at someone you have not seen since they were 12 years old and are now encountering at full scale. He said, "You got big." Shaq made the sound that is almost a laugh and is something else too. He said, "Yes, sir." They drank coffee for a moment in the way that people who have something to say sometimes drink coffee first to establish that this is not an emergency, even when it is. Then Shaq said, "I know about the house, Eugene." Eugene looked at his coffee. He said, "Gertrude." Shaq said, "Yes." Eugene nodded slowly. He looked at the bird feeder through the window. 2 sparrows had been joined by a third. He said, "I was going to figure it out." Shaq said, "I know you were." Eugene said, "I've been figuring things out for 84 years. Shaq said, "I know you have." A pause. Shaq said, "The house was acquired this morning, by a foundation. You're not going anywhere, Eugene. You're staying in this house." Eugene Ray Holloway looked at his coffee mug. He looked at the bird feeder. He looked at Shaq. He said, very carefully, "I didn't give you those shoes so you'd owe me something." Shaq said, "I know that." Eugene said, "I gave you those shoes because you could fly, and someone needed to say so before you knew it yourself." Shaq pressed one enormous hand flat against the table surface. He looked at Eugene for a long moment. He said, "I know that too," he said. "I know exactly what you gave me and why. And I'm not here because I owe you. I'm here because a man who believed in something before anyone else did deserves to keep his house. That's all this is." The kitchen was very quiet. The sparrows at the bird feeder moved and resettled. The coffee maker finished its cycle with a small sound. Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old, looked at the table. He said, very quietly, "Vera would have liked you." Shaq said, "Tell me about her." And Eugene told him. He talked about Vera for 45 minutes, about meeting her in 1971 at a teachers' conference, about the way she laughed, which was a laugh that started small and built slowly and ended with a sound that could fill a room, about the house, which they had bought together in 2003 and which she had made into a home in the specific way that some people have, which is not by decorating it, but by being themselves fully in every room until the rooms remember them. About the garden in the back that she had planned for years before they had a yard, about first grade, about what it meant to believe in 7-year-olds, about the morning in November of 2018. He told it simply, the way he told most things. He said, "I woke up and she wasn't breathing, and then she was gone, and I made 2 cups of coffee that morning from habit. I stood at the counter and I looked at the 2 cups for a long time." Shaq looked at the table. Eugene said, "You never stop making 2 cups, even now, 6 years later." The kitchen was quiet. Then Shaq said, "Do you still have them, the shoes?" Eugene looked at him. Then he pushed back from the table. He moved through the house to the bedroom at the back. Shaq followed. The bedroom was clean and spare. A dresser, a bed, a nightstand with a book and a photograph. In the closet, above the hanging clothes, a single cardboard box on the top shelf. Eugene reached up and took it down. He held it in both hands for a moment. Then he handed it to Shaq. Shaq took the box. He stood in the bedroom at 114 Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey, holding a cardboard box that was 41 years old. He lifted the lid. Inside, the tissue paper, still folded. The shoes, blue and white, never worn. The smell of rubber and something like the past. And on the inside of the lid, in blue ballpoint pen, in handwriting that was the same handwriting as always, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He stood completely still for 11 seconds. Then he set the box down carefully on the dresser, and he pressed both hands over his eyes, and he stayed that way for a long time. Eugene Ray Holloway stood beside him and did not say anything. He understood something about silence that not everyone understands, which is that it is sometimes the only adequate response, and that filling it is a form of disrespect. When Shaq finally moved his hands, his face was the face of a man who has received something he did not know he needed. He looked at Eugene. He said, "You kept them for 41 years. Eugene said, "Some things you keep." Shaq looked at the shoes. He said, "He told me I could fly before I knew I could." Eugene said, "You already could. I just said it out loud." And that was the whole thing. That was all of it. They went back to the kitchen. They had more coffee. Shaq told Eugene about the foundation acquisition. He explained how it would work. The house would transfer to the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund. Eugene's rent would be set at a rate that his income could support. The maintenance would be managed by the foundation. He would stay. He would stay as long as he wanted to stay. Eugene said, "I don't need charity." Shaq said, "This isn't charity. This is a retired postal worker who spent 30 years delivering mail through Newark winters getting to keep his house. That's what this is." Eugene was quiet. He said, "Vera always said the right things find their way." Shaq said, "She was right." Gertrude Moss knocked on the door at 1 in the afternoon. She had been watching the clock since 11:30. She had a plate of food. She did this. She opened the door and she saw Shaq at the kitchen table, and she stopped in the doorway with the plate in both hands, and she said, very quietly, oh good." She set the plate on the counter. Shaq said, "You made the call, Gertrude." She said, "Somebody had to." Eugene said, "I told her not to." Gertrude said, "You didn't get a vote." And then the three of them were in a small kitchen in Irvington, New Jersey, on a Thursday afternoon in March, with coffee and food and sparrows at the bird feeder and an 84-year-old man who was staying in his house, and that was enough. The paperwork for the property transfer closed on March 12, 2025. The Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund formally acquired 114 Grafton Avenue, Irvington, New Jersey. Eugene Ray Holloway received the legal confirmation by certified mail on March 13, 4 days before his original deadline. He called Gertrude. He read her the letter. She listened. Then she said, "Good." He said, "Good." Then they were both quiet for a moment on the phone. He said, "I made 2 cups of coffee this morning. I drank both of them." She said, "Eugene." He said, "I'm all right." She said, "I know you are." The cardboard box with the shoes is now in the house on Grafton Avenue. Eugene put it back on the top shelf of the closet after Shaq left. He put it back because that was where it lived. But he left the closet door open. He had not done that before. He left the closet door open so the box was visible from the bedroom, and he thought about it sometimes when he was getting ready in the morning, and it did not feel like a sad thing. It felt like what it was, a record, a pair of shoes in a box on a shelf that said, "I saw you before you arrived. I believed in what you were going to become before you had given anyone reason to. That is what I had to give, and so I gave it." Kevin Okafor presented the Irvington housing situation to the Foundation's community housing team in April of 2025. He presented the model that had been used, the acquisition, the preservation trust, the rental structure. He asked the team to identify other properties in Newark and Essex County where similar situations existed, where elderly residents on fixed incomes were facing displacement from properties acquired by development holding companies. By July of 2025, the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund had acquired 7 additional properties in Essex County, 42 residents in total, all of them staying in their homes. Patricia Delacroix, who had made the call that had begun all of this, was asked by Kevin to serve as the program's community housing coordinator for the Essex County region. She accepted. She said yes before he had finished explaining the role. She called Gertrude Moss to tell her. Gertrude said, "I told you somebody needed to call." Patricia said, "You were right." On a Tuesday morning in April of 2025, 6 weeks after the house was secured, Shaq drove back to Irvington. He brought breakfast from the diner on Springfield Avenue. He knocked on the door of a 114 Grafton Avenue. Eugene opened the door. He looked at the bag. He said, "You brought food?" Shaq said, "Yes." Eugene said, "Come in." They sat at the kitchen table with the breakfast between them and the spring New Jersey morning coming through the window above the sink, and the bird feeder occupied by the usual sparrows and one cardinal that was very red and very still at the edge of the feeder. Eugene said, "The cardinal comes in the mornings now, started in March." Shaq looked at the cardinal. He said, "That's a new development." Eugene said, "Vera liked cardinals." Shaq looked at the cardinal for a moment. He said, "I want to ask you something." Eugene said, "Ask." Shaq said, "In 1984, when you bought the shoes, did you know what was going to happen? Did you know who I was going to be?" Eugene looked at his coffee. He said, "No, nobody knew that. You didn't know that." Shaq said, "Then why?" Eugene was quiet for a moment. He said, "Because you were 12 years old and you had a gift, and you were playing in shoes held together with a rubber band. That was enough reason. I didn't need to know what you were going to become. I just needed to know what you already were." Shaq looked at the table. Eugene said, "Being big means nothing. What matters is what you do with the space you take up. You were going to take up a lot of space in this world, Shaquille. Somebody needed to make sure you had the right shoes for it." The kitchen was quiet. The cardinal at the feeder was very still. Shaq said, "My stepfather used to say something like that." Eugene said, "Smart man." Shaq said, "Yes, sir." They ate breakfast. They talked about the neighborhood, about what Clinton Avenue had been and what it had become, about the chess program in the community room on the first floor of the building that was no longer there, about the children who had come to the chess program and where they were now, the ones Eugene kept track of. He kept track of most of them. He said, "That's the thing about children. You give them something and they carry it further than you can see. You don't know where it goes, but it goes." Shaq thought about that for a long time. He thought about $64 on a Thursday afternoon in August. He thought about what 41 years of that looks like. The Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund published its first quarterly report in July of 2025. 7 properties, 42 residents. The report did not name any of the residents by name. It described them only in aggregate. Average age 71, average length of residence 23 years, average income $1,200 per month. Kevin sent a copy of the report to Eugene. Eugene read it at the kitchen table. He put it down. He looked at the bird feeder through the window. He called Gertrude. He said, 42. She said, "I heard." He said, "From one call." She said, "From one call." They were quiet for a moment. He said, "Vera would say something about seeds." Gertrude said, "She would." On a warm Tuesday in September of 2025, a woman named Dorothy Ashford, 77 years old, received a letter from the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund informing her that the property at 22 Essex Place in Newark, where she had lived for 31 years, had been acquired by the fund and that her tenancy was secure. Dorothy Ashford had received a displacement notice from the same Meridian Property Holdings Company in August. She had 2 weeks left. She had not told her daughter, who lived in Philadelphia, because her daughter had enough to worry about. She sat at her kitchen table in Newark on a Tuesday morning and read the letter 3 times. Then she called her daughter. She said, "You remember I told you not to worry?" Her daughter said, "I remember." She said, "You don't have to." Dorothy Ashford did not know who had acquired her property or why. The letter described the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund and provided Patricia Delacroix's contact information and said that a housing coordinator would be in touch to discuss the rental terms. She called Patricia Delacroix. Patricia answered. Dorothy said, "I don't understand why someone did this." Patricia said, "Someone believed you deserved to stay in your home. That's all the reason there is." Dorothy was quiet for a moment. She said, "Can you tell me who?" Patricia said, "The fund prefers to work quietly." Dorothy said, "Then please tell whoever it is, thank you." Patricia said, "I will." She did. By December of 2025, the fund had expanded to include 18 properties across Essex County, 97 residents. Patricia Delacroix had built a small team of 3 housing coordinators. Gertrude Moss had agreed to serve as a community liaison for the Irvington neighborhood, which meant she called people and listened and told Patricia what she found. Eugene Ray Holloway came to 3 community meetings about the program. He came as a resident, not as anything else, because he was not interested in being anything else. He sat in the folding chairs in the community room at the senior center on Chancellor Avenue, and he listened, and occasionally he said something. And when he said something, people listened to what he said because he was 84 years old and had spent 30 years carrying mail through every kind of weather and knew something about the difference between what people said they needed and what they actually needed. At the December meeting, a woman named Carla Washington, 69 years old, newly secured in her Bloomfield Avenue home, said to Eugene, "How did this start? This whole thing, how did it start?" Eugene thought about it. He said, "A 12-year-old boy needed shoes in 1984. Somebody bought them. Everything else is what happens after." Carla Washington did not entirely understand this, but she wrote it down. The shoes are still in the box on the top shelf of the closet at 114 Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey. The closet door is still open. Eugene Ray Holloway, now 84 years old, still makes 2 cups of coffee every morning from habit and drinks both of them. The cardinals come to the feeder in the morning. The sparrows come all day. The garden in the back is not Vera's garden exactly, but it is tended, because Patricia's coordinator arranged for someone to come in the spring and put bulbs in, and they will come up in April. Shaquille O'Neal visited in October. He brought food from the diner on Springfield Avenue. They sat at the kitchen table and Eugene talked about the chess program, and about what the neighborhood had been, and what it was now, and what the difference was between the two. He talked about Vera's first-grade classroom, and the children who had come through it across 29 years, and where some of them were now. He said, "That's the thing about children. You give them something and you don't know where it goes, but it goes." Shaq said, "You gave me shoes." Eugene said, "I gave you a sentence. The shoes were just so you'd believe the sentence." Shaq looked at his coffee. He said, "For Shaquille, so he can fly." Eugene said, "You flew." Shaq said, "I flew." Outside, the October New Jersey afternoon was doing what October afternoons do in New Jersey, which is make itself known, cool and specific. The leaves on the oak tree at the side of the house were in full color. The kind of day that knows it won't last and is being completely itself anyway. Because somewhere out there right now, there is a 12-year-old who already has a gift the world hasn't named yet, who is playing in canvas sneakers held together with a rubber band, who has not been told what they already are, who is waiting for the one sentence that will make everything else make sense. And somewhere near them, there is someone who can see it, who can see what that child is before the world has caught up to them, who has $64, or a kind word, or a hand on a shoulder, or simply the willingness to say it out loud. You don't have to know how the story ends. You don't have to know where it goes. You just have to see the child who can fly and be the person who says so. That is the whole thing. That is the complete instruction. Say it out loud, then let them go. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. From Newark, from Irvington, from Orlando, from every city where someone once told a 12-year-old child something they needed to hear before the world was ready to hear it themselves. We read every single comment, every one, and we love knowing where this community reaches. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the person who saw you before you saw yourself, please hit that like button right now. 1 second, 1 tap. It helps this story reach someone tonight who needs to hear that being believed in before you've earned it is not charity, it's vision. And vision is the most generous thing one person can give another. Because right now, somewhere, there is a child in canvas sneakers, and somewhere near them, there is a person with $64 and a sentence and the willingness to say it out loud. This story is for both of them. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe and join a community that believes the quiet things, the $64 things, the so he can fly things, are the ones that last longest. Share this video with one person today, the one who saw you before you arrived, the one who believed in you before you gave them reason to, because that is exactly how this kind of love travels. One sentence, one child, one pair of shoes at a time. Now click on the video appearing on your screen right now, because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. There is a detail about Eugene Ray Holloway that does not fit neatly into the timeline, but belongs here because it is the kind of detail that changes the shape of everything. In 1987, 3 years after the shoes, Eugene Ray Holloway watched a basketball game on television. It was an NCAA game, LSU against somebody, and he was watching it the way he watched most things on television, which was with his full attention on what was happening and his mind quiet and his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. He watched the game for the specific player, the enormous freshman who moved the way no one that size had any right to move. And he watched the game to its conclusion, and then he turned off the television and he sat in his apartment on the 4th floor of the building on Clinton Avenue and he said out loud, to no one, because Vera was not yet in his life and there was no one else in the apartment. There he goes. He did not call anyone. He did not tell anyone. He went to bed. He did the same thing in 1992, when the Orlando Magic selected Shaquille O'Neal with the first pick in the NBA draft. He watched the broadcast. He said, there he goes. He went to bed. He watched the 1999-2000 NBA Finals, when the Lakers won the championship. He watched the 2000-2001 Finals, the 2001-2002 Finals. He said nothing during any of these games except sometimes when a particular move happened on the court he would nod, the specific nod of someone who is confirming something they already knew. He never told anyone he had bought the shoes, not in 1984, not in 1987, not in 1992, not in 2000 or 2001 or 2002, not in the years after. He had no interest in telling anyone. The shoes had been given. That was the whole transaction. What the boy did afterward was his own. Vera found out about the shoes in 2004. She had been sorting through the closet, the way you sort through closets when you move into a new house. And she had found the box on the top shelf, and she had taken it down, and she had read what was written on the inside of the lid. She came out of the bedroom with the box in both hands. She said, Eugene. He looked up from the newspaper. She said, what is this? He looked at the box. He said, a pair of shoes. She said, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He said, yes. She said, Shaquille O'Neal. He said, he needed shoes. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, you never told me. He said, there was nothing to tell. I bought shoes for a child who needed them. That was a long time ago. She looked at the box. She said, Eugene, he won 3 championships. He said, I know. She said, he won a 4th one. He said, I know that too. She looked at the box for another moment. Then she said, I'm putting this back on the top shelf. He said, that's where it lives. She put it back. She never mentioned it to anyone. She was a school teacher. She understood something about quiet belief that some people never learn, which is that it does not require an audience and is not diminished by silence and does not need to be told in order to have been real. She did say one thing to Eugene, later that year, in November, during a quiet evening when they were both reading. She put down her book. She looked at him. She said, you knew he was going to fly before he did. He said, I thought he might. She said, that's a kind of love, Eugene. What you did. He looked at his book. He said, he needed shoes. She said, I know. She picked up her book. They read. The evening continued. The house was quiet in the way of houses where 2 people have been together long enough to be quiet in the same room without it being a silence. That was 2004, 14 years before she died. 21 years before Shaq stood in the bedroom of 114 Grafton Avenue and lifted a box off a top shelf and read 4 words on the inside of the lid. There is another detail, smaller, but real. After Vera died in November of 2018, Eugene went through the house in the specific way you go through a house when the person who lived in it with you is gone. Not throwing things away, not yet, just accounting for what was there. He opened the closet. He looked at the top shelf. The box was there. He stood looking at it for a moment. He reached up. He took it down. He opened it. He looked at the shoes, the tissue paper, the smell of rubber, fainter now but still present. And on the inside of the lid, in his own handwriting, 41 years old by then, and still clear, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He stood in the bedroom with the box in his hands for a long time. Then he put it back on the shelf. He went to the kitchen. He made 2 cups of coffee. He stood at the counter, and he looked at the 2 cups for a long time. He drank his. He left hers. He did this for several mornings after she died. Then eventually he made 1 cup. But he still thought about the 2 cups. He still thought about what the second cup meant, which is that some habits are not habits. They are the form that love takes when love is practiced every morning for 47 years. He told Shaq this. In October of 2025, at the kitchen table with the food from the diner on Springfield Avenue, and the autumn light through the window and the oak tree at the side of the house in full color. He told him about the 2 cups. He told him about Vera in the bedroom with the box in 2004. He told him what she had said. Shaq listened. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "She was right. It's a kind of love, what you did." Eugene looked at his coffee. He said, "I just bought shoes." Shaq said, "You bought shoes and you kept them for 41 years and you never told anyone and you didn't want anything back. That's not just buying shoes." Eugene was quiet. Shaq said, "My mother used to say that a woman who feeds people is doing God's work. I think you were doing the same kind of work, just with shoes." Eugene looked at the window, at the oak tree, at the October afternoon. He said, "Your mother, how is she?" Shaq said, "She's good. She's well. She asked me to say hello." Eugene Ray Holloway looked at the window for a moment. He said, "She was a strong young woman. She raised you right." Shaq said, "Yes, sir." Eugene said, "Tell her Eugene says hello back." Shaq said, "I will." He did. He called Lucille on the drive back to Newark Airport. He told her about the morning, about the kitchen, about the 2 cups of coffee, about what Vera had said in 2004, about the cardinal at the bird feeder. Lucille was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He bought you those shoes, and he kept them for 41 years. Shaq said, "Yes, Mama." She said, "He never told anyone." Shaq said, "No, ma'am." She was quiet. Then she said, I knew he had something. There was something about that man. I always thought of him as good, the real kind." Shaq said, "He is. He's the real kind." Lucille said, "Tell him I said thank you, not for what he did then, for what he kept." Shaq said, "I'll tell him." He did. He sent Eugene a handwritten note. He sent it by mail because Eugene Ray Holloway was the kind of man who still checked his mailbox every morning and understood letters to be a specific and serious form of communication. The note said, "My mother says thank you. Not for what you did then, for what you kept." He signed it with his first name only. Eugene received it on a Friday morning in November. He read it at the kitchen table with his coffee. He folded it carefully. He put it in the drawer in the kitchen where he kept important documents. The same drawer where he kept Vera's teaching certificates. The same drawer where he had kept, for 30 years, the retirement notice from the Postal Service. The specific drawer where things that matter live. He sat at the table for a while. He drank his coffee. Outside, the November Irvington morning was cold and gray and specific in the way of November mornings. The cardinal was at the feeder. The oak tree had lost most of its leaves. The garden in the back was quiet and waiting for spring. Eugene Ray Holloway, 84 years old, sat at his kitchen table in his house on Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey, and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the bird feeder and the bare tree and the cold November morning. He was home. He was staying home. And that, finally, was enough. In January of 2026, the Lucille O'Neill Housing Preservation Fund held its first formal community gathering at the Senior Center on Chancellor Avenue in Newark. 47 residents from the program attended. Patricia Delacroix spoke. Kevin Okafor spoke. Gertrude Moss spoke, briefly, because she was Gertrude Moss and brevity was a virtue she respected. Eugene Ray Holloway was there. He sat in the third row in his pressed slacks and his gray cardigan, and he listened to everything that was said, and he did not speak during the formal program. Afterward, during the reception, a woman named Louise Ferris, 73 years old, newly secured in her house on Seymour Avenue in Newark, came and sat beside him. She said she had heard he was the one who had started it. She meant the acquisition of his house, which had started everything else. He said, "I didn't start it. A housing advocate named Patricia made a call, and a neighbor named Gertrude told her who to call." Louise said, "And before that?" He was quiet for a moment. He said, "A long time ago I bought a 12-year-old boy a pair of shoes. Everything else is what happens after." Louise Ferris thought about this. She said, $64. He said, $64. She said, "For 47 houses." He looked at her. He said, "The shoes just let him fly. He did the flying himself." She looked at him for a moment. She said, "Still." He said, "Still." Outside the Senior Center on Chancellor Avenue in Newark, January of 2026. The winter was doing what Newark winters do, which is be serious about themselves, cold and real, and making no apologies. The parking lot was slushy. People's breath came in small clouds. Inside, 47 people who were staying in their homes drank coffee from a urn and ate cookies from a tray and talked to each other the way people talk when they have recently been given back something they thought was gone. Eugene Ray Holloway drove home to Irvington. He parked in front of 114 Grafton Avenue. He sat in the car for a moment looking at the house. He went inside. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He looked at the bird feeder through the window. The cardinal was not there. January was too cold for cardinals in the morning, but it would be there in the spring. He drank his coffee. In the bedroom, on the top shelf of the closet, a cardboard box held a pair of blue and white basketball shoes in the original tissue paper, and on the inside of the lid 4 words in blue ballpoint pen, for Shaquille. So he can fly. The closet door was open. The house was his. And that is the story of $64 and a sentence and 41 years, and what happens when you believe in someone before they have given the world any reason to. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. There is one more thing. It is March 6, 2026, 1 year after the parking lot. Shaquille O'Neal drives to Irvington, New Jersey on his 54th birthday. He parks in front of a 114 Grafton Avenue. He brings food from the diner on Springfield Avenue. The same diner. The same food. This is a thing now, a birthday ritual. He does not announce it. He does not post about it. He just comes. Eugene opens the door. He looks at the bag. He says, "You brought food again." Shaq says, "It's my birthday." Eugene says, "I know what day it is." Shaq says, "Then you know I can do what I want." Eugene says, "Come in." They sit at the kitchen table. March in New Jersey is still cold. The window above the sink has a specific light to it that is winter making way for something else. Not spring yet. The idea of spring. A suggestion. The cardinal is at the feeder. Shaq looks at it. He says, "He came back." Eugene says, "March 4th, 2 days early this year." Shaq says, "Vera's influence." Eugene says, "Probably." They eat. They talk about the program. 47 households as of January. Patricia Delacroix's team has expanded to 5 coordinators. There are inquiries from Essex County about the model. There are inquiries from Hudson County. Kevin is managing them. Eugene says, "How many by the end of the year?" Shaq says, "Kevin thinks 70. Eugene nods slowly. He says, "Good." After the food, Eugene goes to the bedroom. He comes back with the box. He sets it on the table between them. He says, "I've been thinking about this." Shaq looks at the box. Eugene says, "I want you to have it." Shaq looks up. Eugene says, "I kept it for 41 years. I kept it because it meant something that needed keeping. But now it's kept. You know about it. You know what it was. It doesn't need to live on my shelf anymore. It needs to go where it belongs." Shaq is quiet. Eugene says, "Take it home. Put it somewhere you can see it. Not to remember me. To remember what you were before the world knew what you were." Shaq looks at the box. He looks at Eugene. He says, "I can't take it." Eugene says, "Yes, you can." Shaq says, "This is yours." Eugene says, "It was mine for 41 years. That's long enough. Now it's yours. It was always going to be yours eventually." A very long silence. The cardinal at the bird feeder is perfectly still. The March light through the window is the specific light of early morning, not quite deciding to be morning. Shaq reaches out and picks up the box. He holds it in both hands. He lifts the lid, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He holds the box for a long moment. Then he sets it down on the table. He presses both enormous hands flat over his eyes. He stays that way for 7 seconds. Then he moves his hands. His face is the face of a man who has received something he has been carrying in absentia for 41 years, and is now actually holding it. He says, "Thank you, Eugene." Eugene says, "You already said thank you. You bought me my house." Shaq says, "That's not what I mean." Eugene looks at him. Shaq says, "Thank you for seeing me before I arrived. That's what I mean." Eugene is quiet for a moment. He says, "You were easy to see." Shaq says, "I wasn't. Nobody else saw." Eugene says, "I had good eyes." And then they were quiet for a while. 2 men at a kitchen table in Irvington, New Jersey, in March, with a cardinal at the bird feeder and a box between them and 42 years of what it means to be seen before you have arrived. Shaq takes the box home. He puts it on the shelf in his office in Orlando, not hidden, not behind glass. On the shelf, visible, between 2 books he reads regularly. The lid is closed, but he knows what it says on the inside. He knows what it has always said. He looks at it sometimes when the morning is early and the office is quiet and the Florida light is just beginning through the window. He looks at it and he thinks about a 12-year-old boy on a basketball court in Newark. He thinks about canvas sneakers and a rubber band. He thinks about a man who went to a store on a Thursday afternoon and paid $64 and wrote 4 words and said let him fly and never mentioned it again. He thinks about 70 households by the end of the year. He thinks about 47 people at the senior center in January who are staying in their homes. He thinks about Patricia Delacroix, who made the second call, about Gertrude Moss, who made the first, about Kevin, who built the structure, about all of it running forward from $64 on a Thursday afternoon in August of 1984. He thinks, some people see you before you arrive, some people buy the shoes before the flight is possible. Some people write the sentence on the inside of the lid before the world has given them any reason to write it, and they keep it for 41 years, and then they give it back to you when you are ready to receive it. And that is the most generous thing one person can do for another. Not the money, not the house, the sentence, for Shaquille, so he can fly. That is the whole story. Outside 114 Grafton Avenue in Irvington, New Jersey, the March morning is cold and specific. The cardinal is at the feeder. The oak tree is bare, but the bulbs are in the ground from last fall, and they will come up in April. Eugene Ray Holloway is at his kitchen table with his coffee, and the window above the sink is letting in the specific light of a day that is deciding to begin. He is home. He is staying home. The house is his. And somewhere in an office in Orlando, Florida, on a shelf between 2 books a man reads regularly, a cardboard box holds a pair of blue and white basketball shoes in the original tissue paper, and on the inside of the lid 4 words in blue ballpoint pen, 42 years old, and still clear. For Shaquille, so he can fly. And that is what a $64 pair of shoes on a top shelf, for 41 years, actually costs a person. Everything. And nothing. Because it was never a cost. It was a gift. Given once, in 1984, on a Thursday afternoon, by a man with good eyes, and $64, and a sentence that turned out to be true. It was always going to be true. He just said it first. And that is the story of what happens when someone sees you before you arrive. That is all. That is everything. Celestine Robards, 66 years old, had been 9 years old in the summer of 1984 on the stoop of the building on Clinton Avenue. She had watched Eugene Ray Holloway come back from the store with the box. She had seen his hand over the lid. She had read the 4 words. She had not mentioned it to anyone in 41 years either, not because she had forgotten, because she had understood, at 9 years old, with the specific instinctive intelligence of children who grow up watching adults move through the world, that this was not her thing to tell. It belonged to the man with the box and the boy on the basketball court. She was a witness, not a participant. Witnesses keep what they see. She had followed what happened to Shaquille O'Neal the way you follow something you were present at the beginning of, not obsessively, with a specific quiet attention. She had watched the games occasionally. She had read the headlines. She had said to herself, sometimes, in the specific way you say things to yourself when you are the only one who knows the full sentence, there he is, flying. She had moved from Newark to Elizabeth to Montclair over the 40 years. She was a social worker now, had been for 22 years, working with displaced families in Essex County. She was the kind of person who had spent 22 years doing work that nobody noticed until it didn't get done, which is the most important category of work. When Patricia Delacroix had called her in February of 2025, asking about Eugene Ray Holloway and the shoes, Celestine had been in her car outside a client's apartment building in Montclair. She had answered the phone expecting something routine. She had not been prepared for the question. She told Patricia everything, about the stoop, about the hand over the lid, about the 4 words. She told it the way she had been keeping it for 41 years, which was completely and without embellishment. At the end she said, I always wondered if he ever told Shaquille. Patricia said, he never told anyone. Celestine was quiet for a moment. She said, that sounds right. That sounds exactly like Eugene Holloway. She came to the January 2026 community gathering at the Senior Center on Chancellor Avenue. She had heard about it through Patricia. She sat in the 4th row. She watched Eugene Ray Holloway sit in the 3rd row in his pressed slacks and his gray cardigan. She had not seen him since she was a child. After the formal program, during the reception, she crossed the room. She said, Mr. Holloway. He turned. She said, I was on the stoop in 1984, when you came back from the store. He looked at her. He said, Celestine Robards. She said, you remember me. He said, small girl, braids, always on the stoop. She smiled. She said, I saw what was written on the lid. He was quiet. She said, I never told anyone. I thought you should know that. He looked at her for a moment. He said, "Thank you." She said, "I watched him fly, Mr. Holloway, for 40 years. I watched him fly, and I thought about those shoes every time." He was quiet. He said, "So did I." They stood for a moment in the reception area of the Senior Center on Chancellor Avenue in Newark. Two people who had been present at the beginning of something 41 years ago and had never spoken about it until now. Celestine said, "For Shaquille, so he can fly." Eugene said, "That's what I wrote." She said, "He flew." He said, "He flew." They had coffee. They talked for 40 minutes. They talked about the building on Clinton Avenue that was gone, about the chess program, about the children from that neighborhood who were now adults, scattered across the country, most of whom did not know each other anymore, and some of whom had done remarkable things, and some of whom had not, and all of whom had been children on a summer afternoon in Newark. Celestine said, "I went into social work because of that building, because of the people in it, because of the way people looked out for each other in it, not all of them, but the ones who did." Eugene said, "You counted yourself among the ones who did." She said, "I was 9. I just watched." He said, "Witnesses matter. Witnesses are how things get remembered." She thought about that. After the gathering, she drove home to Montclair. She thought about the conversation the whole drive. She thought about 41 years of keeping a thing she had seen on a stoop. She thought about what it means to be a witness and to keep what you saw. She called Patricia Delacroix the next morning. She said, "I want to volunteer with the program." Patricia said, "We can use you." She started the following week. She used her 22 years of social work contacts in Essex County to identify residents who were facing displacement but had not yet come forward. She was good at this. She was very good at this. She knew how to find the people who said they were fine. She knew how to ask the right questions. She knew what the signs looked like. By March of 2026, she had brought 17 additional households to Patricia's attention. 14 of them had been secured. She told Eugene about this at the January gathering. He said, 17. She said, 14 secured, 3 still in process. He said, from a stoop. She said, from a stoop. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Vera would say something about seeds. Celestine said, she sounds like she was a smart woman. He said, the smartest. On a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2026, Shaquille O'Neal was in his office in Orlando when Kevin sent him a spreadsheet. It was the fund's updated household count. The number at the bottom of the column was 63. He read the number. He looked at the box on the shelf. He thought about $64. He thought about 63 households. He thought about the arithmetic of what a moment of belief costs, and what it produces, and how the math of generosity is never the math that appears on the surface, which shows you the amount given, but the math underneath, which shows you what the amount given becomes over 41 years when it is kept carefully, and given at the right time to the right person. He called Kevin. He said, let's get to 70 by summer. Kevin said, already working on it. Shaq said, good. He put the phone down. He looked at the box on the shelf. The Florida February morning was doing what Florida February mornings do, which is be mild and golden and apologetically beautiful in a way that feels slightly excessive for February. The light through the office window was the kind of light that arrives at a specific angle and stays for 20 minutes and then moves on. It was on the box, for Shaquille, so he can fly. He looked at it. He thought, a man bought a 12-year-old boy shoes for $64 and wrote a sentence and said let him fly, and kept the shoes for 41 years and never told anyone, and 63 households are staying in their homes because a neighbor called a housing advocate, who called Kevin, who called Shaq, who drove to Irvington on his 53rd birthday. He thought, that is the arithmetic of one act of belief. That is what happens when you see someone before they arrive and you say so. That is not coincidence. That is not luck. That is what one human being does for another when they decide that what they see is worth saying out loud. When they decide that the shoes matter. When they decide that 4 words on the inside of a box lid are worth the $64 and the decades on the shelf and the silence that was not indifference but was simply the understanding that some gifts do not need an explanation for Shaquille. So he can fly. That is the whole instruction. That is the complete curriculum. See the person, say the thing, let them go. And if they come back one day and buy your house, let them do that too, because that is the other half of the gift. The giving and the receiving are both part of it. The arithmetic only works if both sides of the ledger are honored. Eugene Ray Holloway honored it for 41 years, and then he handed the box to the person it belonged to. And now the box is on a shelf in Orlando, and the closet door in Irvington is open. And 63 households are staying in their homes. And somewhere in Newark, a 9-year-old girl who grew up to be a social worker is finding 14 more, and the cardinal is at the feeder, and the house is his, and that is everything. On a morning in April of 2026, the bulbs in the window box at 114 Grafton Avenue come up. Small yellow flowers. Vera planted the bulbs in 2015. Eugene has been replanting them every fall since she died because they come up every April, and they are hers, and he is not going to be the one to stop them. He sees them through the storm door when he brings in the mail. He stands for a moment on the front steps. He looks at the yellow flowers. He goes back inside. He makes his coffee. He sits at the kitchen table. The cardinal is at the feeder. April in New Jersey is the cardinal's best season. He comes in the morning and stays for 20 minutes, and then goes wherever cardinals go, and comes back in the afternoon. Eugene drinks his coffee. He is home. He is staying. Outside on Grafton Avenue. The April morning is what April mornings are in New Jersey, which is the real thing, not the suggestion of spring. The spring, cold and warm simultaneously. The kind of morning that has made a decision. The kind of morning you open a window for. Eugene opens the window above the sink. The April air comes in. He drinks his coffee. And somewhere in the world, something is flying that was once 12 years old and playing in canvas sneakers on a basketball court in Newark with a rubber band at the toe. And the shoes that made it possible to believe in that flight before anyone else did are on a shelf in Orlando, in a box with 4 words on the inside of the lid. And the world is exactly the right size for what it contains. And that is the whole story, and that is more than enough.